Hey everyone, welcome to Johnny Can't Sleep. This is a podcast that is geared toward all those thoughts that you have at night because you can't fall asleep and your mind wanders to all these weird places and you have these interesting, thought provoking type of thoughts, and you may wonder what other people may think about those same topics. And so, this podcast is meant to discuss all that kind of random stuff, everything from current stuff to Gen X topics and other things like that. On this podcast, we have a variety of different guests. I have a lot of friends that are very bright friends that have a lot of interesting things to say, and so it makes this a lot more fun bringing them in. And today I have one of my good friends, Steven, and him and I worked together for a long time in the communications industry in the early 2000s, the communication and cell phone boom, and we've been friends for a long time. So today we're going to talk about what was life like on an average Friday night when you were 15. Now I'm a little bit older than Steve, probably around 8 or 10 years older, so might be a little bit different. Steve grew up in in California on the California coast. I grew up in Nebraska, so I'm a little bit more Gen X, and he's maybe the earlier millennial generation. So it should be a lot of fun talking about these topics. So we'll start off with what we were doing on an average Friday night when we were 15, and then maybe just get into life in general at age 15, and then maybe get into a little bit of what it was like when we were 17, 18. You're driving, and obviously your interests and things you're doing changed a little bit. So we can start off with, well, what was life like for you when you were age 15 on the Central California coast? And that would have been would that have been around the mid 90s or so for you, Steve?
Yeah, I think my first year in high school was the 99 2000 high school year. So we're switching into the new millennium at that point. And to set the scene, like Dustin said, I grew up on the central coast of California. So a lot of people don't know where that is. That's sort of smushed between San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara. So sort of this little coastal area that's below central California. A lot of people get that confused. And then above Southern California. So we're in this cool little area. Weather's great all the time. There's a city there called Nipomo, which actually was voted some of the best weather in the nation. So very cool area. I think it's a little bit different than what you grew up in, Dustin. I think we're going to be covering both time and distance here. It's, like you said, I think it's about a decade apart and what 1,500 miles maybe, something to that
Yeah.
extent. I have the worst memory. So this is going to be a conversation really of a exercise in trying to remember what the heck I was doing over 2 decades ago. I barely remember some of those areas. So at 15, what was I doing? I was pretty heavy into sports at that point in time. Super heavy focus on cross country, soccer, track, stuff like that. Friday nights were little town things. I grew up in a town called Santa Maria. I think we had 60,000 ish people at that time. So Friday nights for us was football games. You go to football games, hang out with some friends. At 15, I don't know how much we did afterwards. Maybe a few little house parties here and there, but for the most part during that time frame, football and just hanging out with friends. Nothing too crazy yet. I think a lot of that changes once you start going into your 16, 17.
Yeah, I know sports were pretty important where I grew up in the middle of Nebraska. Well, obviously, being in Nebraska, you're talking Husker football too, so high school football leads into that too. And a lot of people you knew in high school that were trying to get to the point of being recruited by University of Nebraska, and that definitely was a situation where high school football was super important. And I think in my early years, maybe my freshman and sophomore years, I believe my team was in the playoffs for high school ball, so it was super important then. And then the next couple years, they weren't quite as good. I was thinking about that, like you said, I had to make some notes on things. Think about, well, what was I doing back in those days?
Right.
So back in those days, being around 15 or so for me would have been probably around 1989, 90-ish or so. And thinking back to what was fun and what you wanted to do then before you were able to drive, I remember you always wanted to go to Blockbuster and get whatever the latest movie was and hope that you got there early enough to get it. If you remember going to Blockbuster and you were going to the shelves and they had all of those movies on the shelf, but you had to look behind them to see if the movie was actually there, try to find whatever the latest movie was. Maybe you were going to get like Pizza Hut, get some pizza to bring home, watch a movie or two, pop some popcorn. Might have been a situation where you were having a sleepover with a couple of friends or whatever the case happened to be. But
Well, it's
I
funny. We were talking about
remember,
this the other night too, and we both mentioned Blockbuster. But the one thing that I found interesting is you guys had a soft serve yogurt place like right next to that too. So did we. We had one called TNT's, and that was sort of like the spot to be. You would be at like
yeah,
TNT's frozen yogurt with your friends, obviously that were working there, and then you go over to Blockbuster afterwards, grab a movie, and then head in for the night.
yeah, I know. We usually wanted to go to TCBY yogurt and get whatever we wanted to get there. Well, that was always cool because the flavors changed, the flavors of the
Hmm.
week. We had Dairy Queen too, and Dairy Queen had been around there for ages, but I think TCBY might have been newer at that point. So it was like the cool, hip place to go, and you might run into some people you knew from high school there on a Friday night. One of those things, obviously, you had a lot of sleepovers with friends or tenting out in the backyard in the summertime when the weather's nice and try to sneak out and ride your bikes around the neighborhood late at night. And I remember playing, it was like a version of hide and go seek that we played a lot called Ghost in the Graveyard. And I had to look that up the other day because I haven't played it in so long, like since we were kids. And I'm like, gosh, how did you play that game? I remember playing that. We played that all the time, but someone hid and they were the ghost. And then there was a base where everybody then ventured away from base to try to find the ghost without getting tagged by the ghost and get back to base. I remember we played that a lot, probably when we were 10 to 14, 15 years old or something like that. But
That's a new game
I
for me. I haven't heard
know.
that one before.
Yeah, I know. And I haven't heard of it in ages. I don't know if it was more of a Midwestern thing or what, but it was kind of a twist on hide and go seek. But then I Googled it the other day. Yeah, it's on there. So obviously it was prominent enough, around the country. I guess that's the thing now with internet. You can always look things up now, where back in the day it was, you had no idea,
Yeah, a
how
little different then.
it was.
Yeah. Well, the town you grew up in, was it pretty small? Like you could just sort of get around and
So I know you said you grew up in a town about 60,000. I think when I was growing up, the town I was in was probably in the neighborhood of about 35,000. I
hmm.
think it's probably around 50 or 60,000 now, but it was a bit smaller back then, but it always felt very safe. Parents didn't really ever worry where you were at or what you were doing or anything like that. It was a, pretty safe type of place to grow up in. I guess when it came to doing stuff, it was always one of those things where I had a lot of chores to do first. If I was going to go hang out with my friends, I may have to mow the yard or help dad with some yard work or tree trimming or various things like that, especially in the summertime. I couldn't get on your bike and just go immediately. You had to make sure the animals were fed. We always had dogs and cats and various other animals too. I look back on things. Oh man, I had way more chores to do when I was young than what kids typically have nowadays. But I just wanted to get them
Yeah.
done so I could go hang out with friends. So
Yeah, it's a good incentive to get your chores done. Yeah, it's different. Like my kids now, man, they probably have a tenth of the chores that I had when I was growing up too. They get
oh
by
yeah,
pretty easy these days. Mostly in the
yeah,
room playing video games, something like to that extent now.
yeah. I remember one of my buddies got the first Nintendo when it came out, but we didn't game nonstop like they do now. We may be riding our bikes around and then maybe you needed to come back for a drink or get out of the heat a little bit. You sat down and you took turns playing Super Mario or Contra, and after an hour or so, you're back outside. The video games didn't have quite the pull that it does on people now. But of course, the games now are like so high tech and in depth and really engage all your senses. They weren't quite like that back in the day. So it
Yeah,
is
so I
kind
think this is where our age gap shows a little difference too. I think in the mid 90s, I think PlayStation, all that stuff was starting to come out then. And I mean, at that time, I was 10 or something to that extent. So we were playing video games a lot more, parents forcing you to go outside more, but we had this good blend of a majority of the time we're actually outside, out and about, just cruising around the neighborhoods on our bikes. There really
of. Hmm.
wasn't like there is today where there's a lot more paranoia and, kids not getting out as much as they are. But back then, we were all over the place. And then we had a good balance, I think, of the video
Yeah.
games. Where I think in your generation, it was a little different. There wasn't tons of video games that, like you said, Nintendo, maybe,
Yeah.
but most of the time you're outside.
Yeah, that was the deal. Like I remember like our childhood, I think the most important thing really was your bike. Like what kind of bike
Hmm.
did you have? It wasn't so much what kind of video game system did you have and what games, and we were kind of in on that craze with the freestyle bikes. My whole neighborhood friends group, we had GTs and Haros and Hutches and all the cool freestyle bikes and
Goose
stuff
and
like
whatever else
that.
was out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember having a Hutch Trickstar. It ended up getting stolen when I was in college, and they're worth a lot now. But
Are they really?
anyhow, so what's that?
I said, are they really now?
Yeah, they're like, I don't know, 5 grand or something like that. Like
Jeez.
a lot because it was like the top of the line, one of the best freestyle bikes. And it's one of those nostalgia things where I thought about buying one for myself again just to be able to mess around with it, but kind of hard to justify since they're so expensive, these days because it's desired by I think a lot of people for nostalgic reasons, I'm sure. But yeah, we rode around, and it was one of those things you were riding all over town, and parents didn't know where you were at half the time, and you knew if the street lights came on, it's getting dark. Okay, I better get home. Time to get home and eat. That was always your signal to head home. We also grew up like a couple blocks from this monstrous city park. We used to ride over there and we did all kinds of stuff. I remember we took our bikes up to the top of like these tall slides and we would ride down the slides and just all kinds of crazy stuff. Put 5 or 6 picnic tables together and get up there on our bikes and then get going real fast and try to kind of bunny hop off the end and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And we had order videos on how to do different freestyle tricks and things like that. We were always outside making ramps and doing all kinds of stuff like that. Or we were watching, and this might be a little bit before your time, but in the 80s there was a good movie named Rad. I don't know if you've seen it. It's kind of had a resurgence again,
Uh-uh.
but Rad was kind of a freestyle tricks on bikes and all kinds of stuff. So Rad was cool, and then we also had nice skateboards too, like some good Powell Peralta boards and stuff, and skated around a bit too. And I remember we watched a lot of the like the Bones Brigade videos. There's like one, actually, I think it was filmed a lot in LA, but it was called The Search for Animal Chin, where they go skateboarding around LA and various other places, all these cool spots, and they're looking for this original skateboarder. And I don't think they find him, but it was kind of a cool storyline where they're skating all around, and it's like the best skateboarders, Tony Hawk and that whole group of guys. So that was kind of our thing since we were in a little bit more rural area where there weren't as many other huge events and other things. We were riding our freestyle bikes around, trying tricks and skateboarding around and just doing constructive things
Yeah,
outside.
we try to do that stuff too. Well, I said a lot of people did that even in the mid 90s for my age too. So BMX bikes,
Yeah,
rollerblades, skateboards. It was just nothing I was ever very coordinated about. I tried it. I tried it a few times and I couldn't ride a skateboard for the life of me. It just wasn't something that ever clicked.
gotcha. I was pretty good on the freestyle bike. I wasn't as good on the skateboard either, but it was still fun and I had a cool board, and I don't remember what happened to my board. But that was one of those things we did. We also had like forts in the woods too. Like
Hmm.
some of the older kids would build forts on the edge of town, or you may ride your bikes over there and some of the older kids would be there. I remember one of the forts we always wanted to go try to hang out at, and we might have been this. I was probably a little bit younger than 15 at this point because the older kids were probably around 15. So we might have been about, 12. But you ever seen the movie Stand By Me?
Yeah.
So there's a scene in there that kind of reminds me of my childhood where they go to the treehouse fort and they're looking at bad magazines and stuff in there. I remember couple older kids. The fort wasn't anywhere as cool as the one they have in the movie. But I remember going there like, oh, I heard James has this bad magazine. We need to go to the fort and see if we can see it, see who's there, or if we can find where they hid it, or the crazy stuff you used to do back in the day. But and then that made me think about the fact that like when you're hanging out with older kids and stuff, this is like before the internet really, so it's like some bigger kids said it must have been true. You know,
of
you didn't have
course.
any fact checking that you could do back in those days. So it was like people went around believing things until much later on finding out it was just a joke or not true.
Something that you live with for like 20 years until you realize the truth.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, totally. So
Well, so is that what you guys typically did on Friday nights out there, or did you guys do
yeah,
football,
Friday
same
nights.
things
I mean,
too?
you may rent a movie, or you may go riding around with your friends, your biking group, and go hang out as late as you could. On a Saturday morning,
Mhm.
you were going to watch cartoons when you were young, maybe a little bit younger than 15. You got a big bowl of cereal and cartoons. That was the main day it was on. So 6 or 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning until 11 or noon. That was what your Saturday morning was like, and you watch whatever you could. I know Saturday afternoons, in the fall especially, was for Husker football. That was huge in Nebraska. That was like religion. So I don't know if that would be similar to like where you were at, if USC or UCLA, or if those teams
Uh,
were huge and or if there was just too many teams. We only had the
there's a lot of
Huskers. So
teams, yeah, and we were pretty far away from all that stuff too. At least that wasn't a big part of my childhood was college football at all. I think the closest university to us is UCLA. Well, I guess that's not true. We have Cal Poly to the north of us, but
yeah.
no big football organizations out there. So it wasn't ever any college football wasn't anything that we ever really dove into too much. I really didn't have a taste of it. I don't think until I met you and you talked about it. So that's when college football ended up being on my radar,
Yeah.
but not much as a kid.
Like just thinking about that, something came to my mind about how diehard Nebraska football was when I was growing up. Like if someone was getting married in the fall, they made sure that they scheduled their wedding on a bye week or no one would come.
Is it still like that, or is that faded away?
That's maybe faded a little bit, but like in the 80s and 90s, Nebraska was top 10 every year, probably all through the 80s and 90s. So it was huge. And if you were getting married, you probably needed to pay attention if you were getting married in the fall when the bye week was, or if there was going to be, well, usually you had to schedule it, way in advance. You didn't know what time a game was going to be, so you just didn't bother to schedule your wedding date on a weekend that wasn't a bye week.
That's so crazy.
It is, you think about it. I mean, there's probably some areas. If anyone's listening, I'm sure if people grew up in Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma was probably a lot the same way, maybe Tennessee. I'm trying to think where you had some really good teams that were the prominent team in the area. Where you're at, there's so many different sports, but where we were at, the main sport was Husker football. That was it. So everyone was on board with that. I remember when I was 15 and I was working at the grocery store, and if you had to work on a Saturday that was a Husker football Saturday, that game would be played the whole time over the PA. So when the Huskers would score a touchdown, you would hear all kinds of random cheers from the aisles. All the people that were shopping, maybe it's some wives that weren't into it quite as heavily as their husbands, and so they thought, oh, that's a good time to go shopping. There won't be a lot of people there. But if you had to work, it also would be on the PA so you could listen to it, and someone may score a touchdown and you hear all these loud cheers and hoot and hollering from the aisles, everyone that's shopping. So that's kind of funny when you think about it, like that wouldn't happen in a lot of other places, but that's how important it was, growing up.
No, I love the
So
devotion. I think that's really cool. It's actually probably makes it a lot of fun.
it
Uh,
it did. And then if you were going to games, all the tailgating and everything, the game itself was fun, but all the festivities and activities going on around it before and after it were just as fun. People had a good time. I guess we can kind of merge into talking about how things were when we were 17, 18-ish, like driving and stuff like that. Once you started driving, what changed for you, or what different things did you do at that point?
No, I mean that changes everything for a lot of people, right? Because in our town, unless you're staying in the town, you need to take a car somewhere. Because here in Arizona, one city blends into the next, and you could just walk down the sidewalk and be in two different cities. Where I grew up, it was 20 miles in between cities. I was probably similar to you, where there's a lot
Yeah,
of space between the two. So having a car opened up a lot of new opportunities. And one thing that we did a lot was trucks were big back then because we had the dunes. So we had like Pismo and Oceano dunes, which is a unique area where you can actually drive on it. So once we got our licenses, that's sort of where everyone congregated after that. We would head over, drive onto the beach, which is pretty cool because you're driving on like the hard packed wet sand, and you go all the way out to the dunes, and there's like dune competitions, people going up big dunes and seeing if they can make it or not make it, or big bonfires. That was another big one that we had was uh, you'd always bring out pallets or your old Christmas trees and stuff like that, and go into the middle of these dunes and just like these crazy big bonfires and just sort of hang out and have
that's
a
cool.
a little party there. So getting the license was a big game changer for us. It opened up a lot of opportunities to go have fun in other places, which was pretty cool. What about you guys? What were you guys doing once you got your
So, I mean,
licenses?
once you got your license, there was still, it's one of those things when I look back at it, it probably was a continuation of something that had been happened since the probably the 60s or 70s. A lot of people on a Friday night then would go cruise the strip up and down. There was probably a couple mile stretch. People would drive back and forth, and then you'd run into some of your friends, and then maybe figure out what's going on later that evening, or coordinate some things to to go do with your friends. So you cruise around a bit, seeing who's out and about, and then that kind of started the process of, oh, I'm seeing a few of my friends. Let's you pull into some parking lot and talk and figure out who's hanging out, where's everyone going later, and there might be parties out in the middle of some fields outside of
Hmm.
town, which always involved directions like go west out of town for 2 miles until you hit that old barn that's falling down, take a right, go 3 miles, and then you'll see the broken down tractor on the corner of that intersection. That's where you take a left, and as soon as the road starts to curve, there's a little side road there. Take that road and we'll be in the middle of that field hanging out, partying, or whatever the case
I don't know
happened to
how
be.
we got around back then, man. Like, yes, first driving for me was same thing. I think it was like before MapQuest was going on. So you had to
Oh
get all
yeah.
these weird, obscure directions from people and hope to God you made it to wherever you were going. But we always ended up in the right spot, so
Yeah, I
that's
know,
fun.
I know. Yeah, I think about that. We were able to do that back in the day, but I don't know if our kids, if Google Maps and things like that, Apple Maps quit working, could they look at a map or take directions like that and find their way where they're going? I don't know.
It'd be a fun test. Kill our kids' phones when they're driving, see what happens, see if they can figure out how to
Yeah,
get home. But yeah,
it's like
I'm
that.
with you. I don't think they could figure it out.
It's like that meme that you see. Sometimes I'd like to drop my kids off in 1985 and see if they could survive. you know. But trying to think what else do I have written down. Another thing, when I was probably about 18-ish or so, one of the guys that I worked with at the grocery store, he had a roommate that was an assistant manager at Pizza Hut. On a, like a Friday night or Saturday night, we might be hanging out at their apartment, and they were a couple years older than us. They were probably about 20, and we were probably 18-ish. And we would always call in an order periodically if our buddy Ken was working, and we might use like a name on the order. This of course before caller ID or anything like that. And Ken would know ahead of time we were going to call in an order for with a fake name, and then when no one came to pick it up, Ken would just bring it home at the end of his shift because they got to do that. But we may call it in and be like, oh, I need a large sausage and pepperoni pizza, and I'll come pick it up. My name's Wolfgang Smith. And he would know when he heard the name, he's like, oh, yeah, that's an unusual name. That's not real. That's for me to take home later. And I remember we'd do crazy things like that. Or occasionally be halfway through the night and we'd check in with him, and there might already have been a pizza that someone didn't come pick up. He's like, oh, we're good. We got one to bring home. You don't need to call anything in. Things that can't get away with nowadays is kind of funny. So I know there was that. I was thinking about also things like they still have autos in high school because I know my boy Carson was talking about wanting to take it, but I remember back in the 90s when I had auto mechanics in high school, a lot of times you'd make some money working on some of your friends' cars.
Mm.
And they might tell you like, oh, I need the oil changed in my car. And so you bring it in, do an oil change on it, and they give you, whatever, 10 or 20 extra bucks or whatever the case happened to be, or it would be washing cars. If you're done with all of your stuff, all the different things you were supposed to do, then it was mostly just kind of a hangout and killing time. I remember we made some money on autos, and I think we even did that for like some teachers. There might have been some teachers that were like, "Oh, you can pull my car in and change the oil and and everything, and I'll give you some
It's a
money."
win-win. Yeah.
Win-win, yeah, yeah, totally. So there were things like that I remember doing. I remember back in those days, car stereos were really important too. When we were 17, 18, you're like junior and senior in high school. I remember some buddies that they had crappy little cars with really expensive, nice stereos in them that were probably worth more than the car. And it's just kind of funny when you think back to it. I had a buddy that had a really nice Alpine system. And then he had one of the bag cell phones. My buddy Rick, we'd always be like, "Oh, Rick, can we make a call from the cell phone?" He's like, "No, that's like $1 a minute. No way." One of those things that it was all for show. "What do you have it for?" "Well, I might need it." Just went with the whole stereo and the whole setup, but I don't think he ever used it. It was just to impress people, but it was kind of funny. I don't know if car stereos, if that kind of faded out at that point when you were in school. Was that
No,
still important?
it got crazy because let's see. I think when I started driving, right around then is when the first Fast and Furious came out. So then it sort of
Yeah.
reignited a whole interest in car tuning and
Oh, yeah.
stereos and all that stuff. So all of high school, everyone was all about crazy stereos and these massive subwoofers in the back that were just so loud it
Yeah.
rattled everything near them. It was it was a lot of fun then, but I don't see that as much anymore now. Like I don't hear cars just like completely bumping it going down the street anymore. I wonder if
Yeah, I
it's
know.
just something they're not interested in anymore. I mean, cars come with pretty good sound systems now, not like they used to in the early 90s,
Yeah.
in 2000s. Pretty garbage then.
I remember like there was this car stereo place in my town, and there was like one period of time if you bought something from them, then you could fill out this little slip to get in a contest to win like this. Gosh, I think it was like maybe like a 1977 Mercury Cougar, but it had like a $5,000 stereo in it. And of course, like all of us at that point were like, "Oh my gosh, I want to win that car." Anyhow, so you could get selected to be in the contest to win this car. And of course, there was this big fishbowl and it had tons of people's names in it. And I think they selected maybe a dozen names for one weekend to compete for this car. I got pulled for it,
No way.
and then it was Friday night. You had to show up at the audio place, and in the parking lot they had this car parked there, and I think the radio station was there, and everyone had to stand around. You had to have your hands on the car the whole time. If you took your hands off the car, you're
Mm,
out of the contest. Last
yeah.
person to win. But then they had to periodically give you a 5 or 10 minute bathroom break for everyone to go to the bathroom and then come back. And in the end, I think there were like maybe half of the people got eliminated. So it started like on a Friday night, and then there were like maybe 6 or 7 people remaining at the very end, and so then they had to do a drawing, and I think I ended up with like fourth or fifth place, and I won a radar detector. And when I think back, of course, I was probably upset that I didn't win it, but it probably would have been one of those things with whoever won it and the taxes and stuff on this car that really was probably a piece of junk car with a nice system might not have been worth it. So maybe it all worked out for the better. But
Wait, so you
yeah,
were
I
there for
remember.
like 24 hours with your hand on a car?
Yeah, yeah, I think it was over 24 hours. I think it started like Friday night, and they had to end it like might have been like noon on Sunday, so it was all night. I can't remember if people had their hands on the car and then they're like trying to like sleep a little bit, and but if someone like falling over and the whistle goes, "Nope, you're out."
Well, that's kind of cool though, because I mean, I think that was big during some of these YouTubers, like in the COVID era. they were doing all those giveaways too, like just after that. I think Mr. Beast did a few. It's kind of cool to see that 20 years later, it's still a contest
Yeah,
that people were doing.
but I was thinking about the differences of growing up in school in California
Mm.
versus Nebraska, and I was thinking a bit about there's obvious things you didn't deal with where you grew up, but
Like snow. I'm
like
sure
snow.
that's a
Yeah,
big
yeah, that
difference
was one of
too.
the first ones, snow days. I remember if it was supposed to be a really bad storm and you got this really bad snowstorm that came through, you may wake up the next morning at 7 a.m. You're still in your pajamas. You're running out to the TV and turning the news on, and you're watching for you know how the NFL draft ticker would go across the bottom of the screen if
Mm,
you're watching that.
yeah,
That's how the snow days would be. And you would be watching to see if the name of your school was going to scroll across the bottom. If you're like, oh, sweet, I don't
every
have
kid's
school
got their
today. It's
fingers
canceled
crossed.
for my
Yeah,
school. To have all the area schools. School is canceled at this high school. So that was always an exciting moment. If you're like, oh, awesome, we don't have school. It just scrolled across the bottom saying it's canceled. Now I can go back to bed for a while and get up and play in the snow.
was it guaranteed pretty much every year that you guys would get a few snow days here and there, or were there years where there
Uh,
was like nothing?
I think there were some years where there wasn't snow days, but then there might be sometimes you got a really bad snowstorm and maybe school will be canceled for a couple of days until all the roads got cleaned up. They don't want people to get stranded or go off the road or something like that in a bad snowstorm where half the people would be probably not at school anyhow.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of varied. Not every year did we get like bad enough snow because if you just got an inch or two, it's probably not going to be canceled. But if you got a snowstorm that was like 6, 8, 10 inches or something along those lines, and the temperatures were really cold too, then you definitely might get a snow day. So it was kind of hit or miss. There were times I remember getting snow days. And there probably were a couple years in a row where you're like, no, there hasn't really been any snow days. So it was kind of random, but
Yeah,
there,
we obviously didn't have snow days, but we did have to deal with earthquake prep. So this wasn't so much in like junior high or high school, but in grade school, it was always kind of fun because at the beginning of the year, you would have to get together like a Ziploc bag of all these different items that you might need during an earthquake. So, you
yeah,
have some snacks in there, you have a sweatshirt in there, you have all kinds of like little tiny games and toys. And then you'd bring it to school and you would just dump it in this big trash bin. So everyone had their own little readiness kit in case an earthquake happened. Um, I don't think I was ever in one as a child where we needed to break that thing out. Nothing got too crazy then. But at the end of
gotcha.
the year, you would always get it back, and then you can always rifle through and get your candy and your gushers or whatever kind of candy you're eating at the time. So that was always a lot of fun. I don't think it was as cool as a snow day, but something that we always
Yeah,
had to deal with in California.
I hear you. We
Hmm.
didn't have earthquakes, but we had tornadoes, and so we would do tornado drills. I remember where I grew up, the tornado sirens would go off the 1st and the 15th of the month at 1 p.m. just as a test. So you
Hmm.
always knew that that was coming. And I think we practiced getting underneath desks and stuff when when the tornado sirens went off. At least probably in grade school, but obviously if the tornado sirens went off and it wasn't the 1st or the 15th, 1 p.m., then okay,
Oh
they're
crap.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, when I was young, when I was a kid about kindergarten age, we had quite a few tornadoes that
Mhm.
that came through our town. And then after that, anytime that tornado sirens went off, it might have been just a funnel cloud spotted. It didn't come down and touch the ground, or it was outside of town a little ways or whatever. It got to where people kind of ignored things mostly, or the sirens might have gone off. I remember plenty of times that it might be a weekend, you're hanging out with some of your aunts and uncles, grandparents, and the sirens go off, and all your uncles go running outside to look and see where the funnel cloud is or where the tornado is to decide if anyone's going to go in the basement or not.
It's
But
so crazy. Like I had a buddy who just moved back to Iowa and he was like, "Oh, forgot about the tornadoes and how crazy it is." And I'll be on like a call with him every now and then. He's like, "Oh, got to go down to the basement. There's another tornado
yeah,
warning." It's just that's crazy. It's so
Yeah,
foreign to
something
me.
different. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't have thought about the earthquake bag or anything like that. That didn't dawn on me. I guess just being in different parts of the country, it's just different things. One of the other things that I thought about too. So you had snow days where
Mhm.
you might have a day or two off here or there. That sort of thing could happen at the start of hunting season too. So the start of hunting season, a lot of the guys might be, they may, their parents may call them into school. You go hunting with dad, whether it's pheasant season, deer season, or whatever but when in the fall when hunting season started, there's a good chance that a lot of the guys, especially the ones you knew that were pretty diehard hunters, probably weren't going to be at school for a couple days.
Good
so
for them.
So anyhow, that happened plenty. I know one of the other things in the summer, and I was thinking about similarity to California, but a lot of people won't really realize this. But growing up in Nebraska, where I grew up kind of in the middle of Nebraska to the west and the north of me is the Nebraska Sandhills, and there's lots of lakes and spring-fed rivers that feed into, these lakes. And so with these hills being so sandy, it made some of the most awesome beaches on these lakes that when you look at them, you would think that's not Nebraska, that looks like California. And going to Lake McConaughey or Merritt Reservoir, if you were to Google Merritt Reservoir beaches, there'd be beach pictures, images that would pop up where you're like, no way, that's not Nebraska. And so we grew up having the most awesome sandy beaches and going out on boats and tubing on rivers. And if you were up in the Sandhills area, it was just like ideal. And so that that was always a lot of fun. So I thought of another thing too, which is really funny. I had this friend Davin. He had a cousin Brian from California. One summer, his cousin Brian comes to visit, and we're trying to show him a good time, and we're just messing around, and we're like, you know what, Brian? Have you ever been snipe hunting? And he's like, no, no, I've never been snipe hunting. And we're like, oh man, we got to take you out. We got to go to the fields outside of town. And so snipe hunting is like this big Midwestern inside joke. I mean, there really is an animal called a snipe or a bird
Mhm.
or whatever, but you just make up whatever this cool looking little animal is, and it's not a real thing, at least not what you're going out for. And so you grab some flashlights and paper bags, and you got a group of people along with your unsuspecting Californian that has no clue. And so we're out in this field and we're like, okay, it's just this little cute little furry animal. And if you put this bait in your bag, like we had probably paper grocery bags or whatever, and you got to run around and shine your flashlight, and then you get out in this field, and what happens is you have a few of your friends that are in on the joke, and it's nighttime. So they go running around and shining their flashlight around a bunch of places, and they're like, oh my gosh, there's one right now. And
That's so
so
messed up, man.
everybody hypes it up, and it seems like everybody's chasing a snipe and trying to catch them. Then it was at this point where your person that doesn't know, Brian's like, I don't see any yet. So they get to focusing really hard on looking and trying to find these snipes running around and see if they can catch one of these little furry cute little critters. And as they're focusing, everybody else just kind of backs away a little more towards the car, and everybody gets into the car without the guy suspecting. And then like you probably honk the horn and you drive off a bit and leave him there for a few minutes and then come back and everyone's laughing, and then they realize they've been had. It was all a big joke. But anyhow,
Poor guy.
snipe hunting is like a big Midwestern joke that they would play on people from other parts of the country that would come visit your cousins or whatever. So I was thinking about that. I'm like, man, we haven't done that in ages. That was like a fun inside Midwestern joke that I'm sure people are watching and listening. They can always chime in and they can let us know if they've ever played the snipe hunting game.
I hope it's still going on. I mean, that sounds like a good time to
Oh,
screw
it
with your
is.
friends.
Yeah. And that's the thing you wonder, like that was good constructive fun. You came back in 5 minutes, but it was good constructive fun that we did before the internet. You had to be creative. I I was just wondering, like, did anyone ever like skip school to go surfing on like a good surfing day or
Yeah, it happened a lot actually. I was never into surfing, but a lot of people did. Something else a lot of people did too was we do ditch days because we were pretty close in proximity to like Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, Magic Mountain. It was all within like a 3 hour drive. So you can just skip
yeah.
school early morning, go hit it for a few hours, hang out for a little bit, and then come back before, sun's even down. So that was something that we did quite a bit, a few ditch days, especially as you become like a junior, senior, your workload's a little bit less, not as crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of us would start doing that kind of stuff. We'd head up that way. We'd go to the Pismo Beach, hang out there. There's also this area called Red Rocks in San Ynez, which is like really cool, like little, I don't know, pond-like structures that you can dive into and cliff dive and all that. And we'd go those directions and just sort of hang out and get away from school for a while. Anything similar where you were?
I remember skipping like for a period or two and maybe going to the donut shop. We had one, I think it was our physics teacher, that would write us a pass as long as we brought him back a donut.
Was it a
So
decent trade?
yeah, we would skip and but we just did that periodically, and we might be like, oh, you know what, I really want a donut today. Let's skip third period, and he'll write us a pass, and that way, if you were to get caught coming back in, it looked like maybe you just got a pass to go get something out of your car or whatever the case happened to be. But I know we did that sometimes, but there wasn't any cool like amusement parks or other reasons I remember people skipping like the start of hunting season. Probably a lot of dads called their sons out of school so they could go hunting, stuff like that. But trying
Well,
to
some of
remember if I,
it's different now too, because like when I was going to school, we had I think it was called open campus then. You can just come and go as you please. And then I know
yeah,
shortly after I graduated, that school went to a closed campus where like gates were locked. Like you couldn't get in or
yeah,
out. It got kind of crazy. And I think my son now, who just graduated, they're in a closed campus too. So ditching isn't as easy anymore. It's pretty much either just
yeah.
don't go in, you can't leave midday, or someone would know.
I,
Like now, if someone leaves school, like I know when my kids are not marked present in a class, like almost immediately.
oh
It's
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
crazy because
yeah,
when we
really.
grew up, it was like 3:15. Someone might get a phone call at home saying that we weren't there all day, but
Yeah,
they wouldn't know until then.
yeah, you're right. We get a notification, and I'll be asking, Carson, it says you missed a class at school today. What did you miss? Oh, I walked in late to such and such class. Yeah, but our parents didn't know back then at all. We had open campus too, which meant the lunch periods you could leave. I remember there were some really good places we would go for open campus for
Mm.
lunch. Like we didn't have much money as kids then, so you always wanted to leave and you wanted to go get fast food, but you wanted to find the best deals you could. I remember copying off this Godfather's pizza coupon I don't know how many times so we could get like 3.99 or maybe 2.99 buffet and a pizza buffet and a drink. We've reused that a bunch, but also I think around that time there was Taco John's, and we used to go there, and they had like it started right around the time that open campus started for maybe my junior and senior year. They had a deal called six pack in a pound, where you got six tacos and you got a pound of their potato olays that look about like. Burger King's little circular hash browns.
Hmm.
They're like that size, but they have a
Yeah.
different seasoning on them, and a lot of times they'd serve it with like nacho cheese and stuff. But you would split that with a buddy, and I think it was like when it first came out, I think it was like $4, and it didn't include a drink. But if you're splitting that with your buddy, it's $2 a piece, and then like a dollar for a drink. So you go eat for $3, you'd have a half a pound of those potato olays. You'd have three tacos and a drink for $3. Like you couldn't beat it. We did that a lot too. We always found the best deals we could find. It's like crazy how expensive fast food is now versus what we dealt with growing up.
Well, yeah, it's crazy because like for us too, like our lunch period, maybe it was 45 minutes. Maybe that's from like when the bell rang to when you had to get into your next seat.
Yeah.
So it was always hectic leaving campus. You're basically just heading to your car and you need to split off
Yeah.
and go somewhere quick. You know, for us, it was always, I don't know how I'm still alive now, but like Jack in the Box or McDonald's. There's this other place
Yeah.
there called Orchid Burger. I don't know if it's there anymore. They had great burgers and ranch. But yeah, you'd always be barely making it back to class for your whatever period was after lunch for you. So that was
Yeah.
fun. It's too bad kids don't know, the open campus feeling anymore. It felt a little
I
bit
know.
nicer, not
And I
as
don't know if
restricted.
it's because, like, the high school that my boy goes to now, the parking lot only accommodates so many cars. If there's a couple thousand kids or more that attend there, the parking lot can't hold a couple thousand cars, So I don't know if not as many people drive to school. Back when I grew up, everybody drove to school,
Yeah, same.
you
Well,
know.
our
So
parking lot was always full too, but I think everyone always parked down like the residential streets.
yeah,
Like that whole, I feel bad for those residents now,
I
but
know.
there's always just lines and lines of cars everywhere, just parked in front of your house, and there's all these knucklehead teenagers driving around.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, it was the same. Like it would spill out onto the residential streets when the parking lots were full. People that were getting to school right before the bell would have to park on the residential streets and try to run and beat the bell. But I mean, growing up also in Nebraska, things were way more wide open, so probably were a lot bigger parking lots too, which is probably now being in the greater Phoenix area where space is at a premium and high schools don't have as much parking space. And I think they sell parking permits now too. I can't even imagine like needing a parking permit for high school parking. It just was unheard of back then. Now it's like they pay $100 a year or a couple hundred bucks. I don't even know what it is, but I think it's at least $100 for a parking permit to be able to park at school. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Hayden did that the last 2 years. We had to make sure we apply early so we can get the permits, and
Yeah.
then he's got this little knocker that hangs from his rearview mirror, make sure that he can get in and out of school. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. I don't remember having to do any of that stuff
Yeah.
a long time ago.
Luckily, I think those were a lot of the different thoughts I had about growing up and things like that. I don't think I missed anything else. Do you have any other thoughts on growing up or experiences or things that were different?
No, I think we covered a lot of the stuff. I mean, sure, there's probably a ton of differences. We could probably talk about ad nauseum later on in
Yeah,
other podcasts about
sure.
differences in parties and what happens after that and all the crazy, stupid stuff that you did in high school. We admitted a lot of that stuff on this particular podcast today.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll do some more for sure. We have a huge amount of topics that I think will be a lot of fun to cover, and we'll just start chipping away at some of the fun ones and have a good time. It's always good to get some good laughs in about how you grew up and things you haven't thought about for a while. A little bit of that nostalgia factor creeping in a bit too. So it's
does that
always a
mean we're
good
getting
time.
old?
I think we'll call that good at the moment. If people that are listening have some comments and things they want to chime in and say about what it was like or what was different about growing up where they grew up, or if they participated in snipe hunting or skipping school to go surfing or whatever the case happens to be, let us know your thoughts in the comments. I think that could be a lot of fun reading what other people have to say on these topics too. So thanks for listening. Thanks everybody.